Okay, so everyone should be getting that. Okay. Well, thank you again, Dr. Anita Lee, for being our guest speaker for today's webinar. Just a quick intro about Anita. She got her PharmD from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her background. But we want to highlight that today she is a current medical science liaison at Thera Technologies. So we are very appreciative that Anita made time today, especially in the midst of the busyness of December, to kind of share her wisdom on how she transitioned from her PharmD degree with her clinical background to her current MSL position, and also really focusing in on our theme of today of how to craft your MSL style. And that's not only what she wanted to mention as a current MSL, but she really highlighted that honing in on that style occurs at all steps of the process from the beginning as an aspiring MSL. So with that, I will kind of point it back to Anita. We'll kick it off by just asking, can you share a little bit more about your background and how you started your PharmD degree process and how that's led you to medical affairs today?
Yes, thank you, Sonia, for the quick intro. And I just want to say, just thank you for the invitation for participating in the event. I know Ask and Tell MSL is just a fantastic resource. And I want to, before we begin, I just really want to take a moment to state that all opinions are my own and not reflective of my company, Thera Technologies. So a little background about myself. I am a medical science liaison for Thera Technologies. I cover the West Coast, and that's about 5 states. I'm based out of Ventura, California. So it's a little north of LA and south of Santa Barbara. I am, again, a clinical pharmacist by training. As Sonia had said, I graduated and then went and did a PGY1 pharmacy residency in 2018 before I stepped into my role as a clinical pharmacist and gained a lot of experience in infectious disease and critical care at my practice in Mountain View Hospital in Las Vegas. So, I loved my clinical work and I really loved interacting with the healthcare providers in the hospital I was at, but I really wanted to make a larger impact on improving patient lives. And I just felt, in the institution that I was at, that really wasn't the case in terms of, changing policies or even being involved more so in therapies that maybe weren't accessible in the hospital. And then I felt a little stagnant in my career, and I had just, finished school a few years prior. I had just interacted with an MSL, and I, learned more about the role. And I felt like, a lot of those characteristics that an MSL had and the responsibilities they were doing, they really appealed to me, and that my personal traits really aligned with that role. And then also that I could make a larger impact, on a bigger scale, if not locally and regionally, and also nationally. So that is really why I kind of got into the medical affairs role. And, just for today, I know the goals of the webinar, you said that the theme is, crafting your MSL role, but I really want the webinar today to recharge those who are listening. I've been in that position where I'm an aspiring MSL and I'm looking for a role, and I've had peaks and valleys, and sometimes you just feel like, you're in that valley. And so I hope today will kind of recharge you to push you forward to continue your MSL search, and then also show you that you're probably practicing a lot of the MSL responsibilities and tasks in your current role, and that you can start that crafting your MSL style right now as you're looking for a role.
Well,
So thanks, Sonia.
Yeah, thank you. That was such a inspiring note to really reach a lot of aspiring MSLs that are listening into this webinar and will so in the future recording. It's really really nice to just hear your whole journey and what drew you into the field to begin with. And kind of touching upon that note, you said you had clinical experience as a healthcare provider, as a PharmD who is practicing in that clinical setting. Do you mind sharing what you learned from those experiences that really are you're able to practice today and kind of utilize that knowledge today as an MSL?
Yeah, and so I was a clinical pharmacist that was on the critical care floor. So, as an ICU pharmacist, we actually did participate in some rounding, and I also had a lot of residents and providers come to me because I sat on the ICU floor with questions, and so that in itself, interacting with that physician and providing, the data that they were looking for to support their um, the therapy that they want to put on or to answer some of their questions. That is part of being an MSL, being that reliable resource to a healthcare provider. And, even nurses, I had other pharmacists come to me as well. So it's definitely something that I started doing right when I started being a clinical pharmacist, having that KOL interaction. And so that's one way. We also had presentations that we did as a resident. I did a lot of presentations in journal clubs, so that was another thing that I kind of had under my belt. And even beyond that, being a part of advisory committees, antimicrobial stewardship committees in the hospital. We also had a pain management committee where we were trying to reduce the use of opioids, IV opioids in the hospital. So, these are some experiences that I took with me and into my interviews, and they're not really the experience itself was, important, but the skills from those experiences, I use those to really leverage myself in some of my interviews and to kind of show the interview panel that I'm already doing these things, and it's really whether I can take what I'm doing now and just put them in a role where I'm in medical affairs,
Mhm.
where I'm as an MSL. So I think whether you're a PharmD who's doing some of those things that I did, or an MD, or even a PhD. I know you guys do a lot of presentations. You're involved in a lot of research, and MSLs are also very involved in the clinical trials. Depending on, I guess, depending on the company, but for me, I'm very involved in clinical trial recruitment, even protocol feedback, and all of that. You can always utilize the skills that you're using right now to apply to the MSL role.
Excellent. That's really nice to hear that the experiences are helping current students and trainees develop those and cultivate those skills that we can use moving forward. So that's really wonderful to hear. And just as a reminder to those who are logging on, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand if you have additional questions in addition to what I'm asking, because we'd love to have this as interactive as we can. Okay, and so moving to our next section of kind of how you prepared for the MSL role. So before we actually had participants log on, Anita was sharing with us kind of her timeline and how the whole process took for her. So I just was wondering if you could just share in general what you were doing as a current PharmD student and kind of what your timeline looked from that time point of actually applying to positions, thinking about positions and applying to positions, and what that application process entailed.
Yeah, and that's a good question, Sonia, because it can look really different for a lot of, your path, depending on your journey, and for different people. For me, after 3 years of clinical practice, I decided, like maybe this is definitely something I want to pursue. So I started jumping in right away to learn about the role, and got very involved in LinkedIn and networking. In total, it took me about, I think, 6 months to get my role, but I know that can range. It can be shorter. And then for some, it could even take a year to 2 years on average. And I had about, like an average, I think there's usually an average of like 4 or 5 interviews before you actually land your role, is what I've heard. And that's not saying that you can't have your first interview and get a role, because that would be like best case scenario. But while I was applying, I was still working as a clinical pharmacist. So I really took time to reflect on the different therapeutic areas that I was interested in and the different experiences that I had in those therapeutic areas. So even when I was practicing, if a patient came in and let's say that had that was in the neurology unit, I would take those experiences. I'm like, is neurology something like a TA that I'm into, a therapeutic area that I'm into? Is this, and then as I'm, watching the patient develop and being involved in their care, these are things that I'm writing down, almost like a journal, that I can actually use when I'm asked in an interview experience, like, tell me about a time when, those are always questions that come up in interviews, and the interview panel always would be interested in like behavioral questions. So just start even thinking about in your current role, like what's happening that you can actually use in the future for these interviews. I also took time to reflect in my past. For example, when I was a pharmacy student, I did a lot of volunteer work and community service. I was very involved in organizations. And so I just happened to be in an organization that served underserved communities. And one of the community service initiatives we had was in the HIV population. I also worked at a HIV specialty pharmacy that was near where I went to school. So using those experiences, that was where my passion for, working with people living with HIV actually first started. And it actually only grew when I became a clinical pharmacist and I had people with HIV coming in ICU and were admitted in care. And so I really, when I was looking for positions in therapeutic areas, some in the therapeutic area of HIV came up. And I knew like that was a therapeutic area that I am passionate about and I really want to pursue. So these are just some ideas, looking in your past and seeing what you've been involved in and seeing if this is a direction you would want to go in. I would say in general, like, don't put yourself in a box where you only, like, I only look at HIV MSL positions or only neurology positions, because you would be really limiting yourself. The best advice that I would have is, you want to expand your therapeutic area pool. And I think the biggest goal is to gain the MSL experience. So once you gain experience, like we're all in positions where you're a PhD, PharmD, MD, you've been able to get to where you are because you're able to learn the material, right? You're able to learn the science. The other part is just being able to communicate the science and do those MSL role responsibilities, like insight gathering and being part of projects, and the communication and the emotional intelligence. Those are the things that I think to really focus on and to show in your interview process.
Excellent. That's such wonderful news to hear. And I think that point that you brought up about having a journal and kind of noting down and doing that self-reflection while you're actually experiencing those learning opportunities, interactions with patients, interactions with projects is great, because it's better to do it then instead of on the spot on an interview, and it's not as well put together. So that's wonderful to hear. And kind of just building off of exactly what you brought up, we do know that applying for MSL positions is competitive, and you touched upon quite a few points that were unique to you in your process to applying to the MSL role. But what is your best piece of advice for candidates to stand out, and how does that kind of relate to developing their style as an interviewee?
So that's a good question. I feel like there's a lot to unpack in that question, just because standing out also is very specific, I think, to that company and that company and their goals, but also like if you match the culture. So I think a really important thing I would recommend is, doing your research into the company, their mission, their values, and, really seeing if you truly think you can fit in. One of the topics, that always comes to my mind is there's different sizes for pharmaceutical companies and MSL teams. So what do you want in what you're looking for? Are you trying to be a part of a larger company, or a smaller company with a smaller team where you can maybe do a little more. So I think that that's, as much as you're trying to stand out to them, they should really try and stand out to you too as well. Emotional intelligence is a big thing that you can always work on and improve upon. So working on that continuously, trying to read the room a little bit, and then having it be more conversational. Like, you really want to showcase yourself in a way that doesn't just dump data on someone or doesn't talk the whole time. You practice active listening. You're able to be flexible in the conversation and not just ask the 5 questions you want to ask without creating a conversation. So I think those things will make you stand out. Having superior presentation skills also is, like, a big thing. We as MSLs do a lot of presentations, and to be persuasive and to be good at presenting the material, that's always good. So maybe improving on story, the way you tell a story, the way you tell the story of the data, is also another way to stand out. And highlight your unique experiences. Like, I know people sometimes they don't want to brag on themselves, but this is like the time to do it. You're in an interview, you kind of have to brag on yourself. I mean, don't go too far and like say that you're the greatest thing ever, but also showcase yourself, because there's a reason why you've gotten to that point. You've gotten the interview.
Excellent point. And we also wanted to kind of touch upon how how networking played a role in finding your job. Obviously, you need to utilize these skills that you just mentioned of emotional intelligence and such. And what did it look like for you in terms of reaching out to people in person and also on LinkedIn?
Networking is so important. I mean, you've probably heard that from a million MSLs, but it's true. Right when I started looking for a position, I jumped onto LinkedIn, and I was able to, had a facelift on my LinkedIn. I started, reaching out to different MSLs and just asked for their time, politely over a message, asking, if they could spend about 15 minutes with me to just tell me a little bit more about their role. I would love to ask them more questions. And this is actually just practice even for you on the, to interview in the interview process. So you're already getting started. MSLs are very active on LinkedIn. So I just highly recommend all aspiring MSLs to get on LinkedIn and to get out there and network. I mean, what do you have to lose? It's kind of all online. I think that another thing that helped me out a lot, and another way I got a few interviews, was just reflecting on who in my life do I know or have I encountered are in medical affairs roles, not even just as an MSL. I knew some directors. I actually used to, when I was in Illinois doing my pharmacy schooling, I was at a CrossFit gym, and I was CrossFitting with a pharmacist who was actually a director at a big company, a big pharma company. And I didn't even realize it at the time, because I was in pharmacy school and I was actually not quite, I was more interested in residency. And so then as I'm going through my LinkedIn, as I'm kind of like, reflecting on who do I know is in medical affairs, I was like, oh wait, this woman that I used to CrossFit with, like, she was so kind. She was always looking to offer to like talk more about industry. And I was like, oh, I'm going to find her on LinkedIn. I ended up finding her. I ended up getting an interview in a position because we used to CrossFit together, and, we were able to like kind of make that reconnection. And she spoke with me a few times on the phone too. So it wasn't just like, okay, I'm going to recommend you because we CrossFit together, but it's just like taking a moment to like reflect on who you know, and maybe someone in your past that could, help you in your journey. I found that MSLs and just people in medical affairs are just very kind, and they're willing to, take some time out of their day to help others. I'm sure it's because it's kind of like a pay it forward thing. Other people have helped me, and I know Sonia, you and I talked a few months ago, so that's kind of how we started our relationship. So I mean, I'm happy to connect with people, and I think that MSLs in general are pretty generous with doing that.
I have to second that point fully, that every MSL, every person in medical affairs that I've talked to has been extremely kind with their time, and they know what it takes to get to that position. So they're very, very willing to pay it forward. So a good reminder for everyone to kind of always keep in touch and keep updated with your connections, because you never know when you'll go back to them. So that's
Truly, yeah.
good.
And like I've been in that position before where I didn't have any connections at first, and I was the one on the other end, and I was like introducing myself and like really nervous, and eventually the nerves go away, and then you become an MSL, and then you're the one that you're on the other side of things. So
yeah. Before
full
you know
circle.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. We did have a specific follow-up question to that regarding reaching out to talent recruiters or hiring agencies, and if that was a route that you personally went through in any capacity, or just have heard from colleagues being successful.
Yeah, I didn't personally reach out to too many talent recruiters. I think that I was in a position where I was just applying a lot on LinkedIn, and I had actually people reach out to me more so. I don't think that is a bad idea if it's something that you're at a point when you think that you need some assistance, and you want the support of a recruiter. 100%, I think that is a great idea to get started on, because that person, that recruiter, it's more like a relationship, and that you would have to, you'll be in communication with them even when you have an MSL role, when you're switching jobs. I think that it's never a bad idea to create that relationship.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
We also had one more question about the actual preparation process, is more just kind of your experience in the interview itself. There's obviously multiple levels that of presentations and people that you're talking to. So if you could just share about what to kind of focus in on that makes an impact in the interview process, and how you're able to kind of secure a position with a successful interview process there.
Yeah. So I guess thinking back to my own experiences, the interview process is lengthy, and it consists of maybe like like 3, 4, 5 interviews sometimes. It definitely just depends on the company, but I think, when this is one example, but everyone has kind of that elevator pitch. You're going to get asked, tell me about yourself. My advice, and something that I tried my best to do, because it's not the easiest to do, is to tell someone about yourself in a way that they can't necessarily read from just your resume. You want to go beyond that, because they have your resume, they have your CV, they see where you've gone to school, what you've done. But if there are traits that you could portray that have to do with, those soft skills that you can convey in a way where, how you were able to develop them when you were younger, I think that is a really good way to capture their attention, and to get them to know you a little more than just your accolades, or just, what they can see on paper. For example, like for me, I'm an only child, and also when I was younger, I played tennis for about 18 years. I actually played in college. So, I developed a lot of my soft skills on the court, playing tennis. It's a very tough sport. You have to be really goal oriented. You have to persevere through many of the challenges of a tennis match. But also, my parents sent me away to go train in Europe with another coach for like a month. So I would be like by myself in kind of a foreign environment. And I mean, I had a great time, and everyone was so nice in a different place, but it helped me to develop those traits of being independent. without them from a very young age. And I did that for a few summers.
Mhm.
But that's just one example of, a way to describe a soft skill that you have from something that maybe started developing when you were younger because of personal life experiences.
Yeah, that's a very memorable experience to share. I'm sure every interviewer would remember that and really know, like, that tennis girl, she was amazing.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, sometimes I try not to go too far into
yeah.
I don't want that to be my whole story
Yeah.
because I'm not like a professional tennis player anymore, or I mean, not anymore, but at all, or trying to do that. So it's just trying to find things in your life that you feel like have made you who you are today, and to say like, I can take this skill that I've developed and I've implemented into my life in many different ways, and now I can take it and be an MSL and exemplify it in your organization.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That kind of transitions to our next point, kind of the focus that we wanted to highlight is next asking, what is your MSL style and how did you cultivate it? How long did it take to develop? And just kind of what you learned along the way.
Yeah. And so this kind of tricky thing to this topic is that the answer is not a clear answer. So
Yep.
the answer is that it's a continuous process. I'm still trying to develop my MSL style. I will say that it took me about 6 months to be more comfortable with it. I've been an MSL for a year and a half now, and yeah, it took me about 6 months for me to find the communication style that I feel like works for me, and how do I tell a story, or how do I connect with the KOL, like how do I want to connect with the KOL, and that I feel like is all part of the MSL style. And also, how do you utilize your emotional intelligence? So, I mean, to be honest, yeah, it's still ongoing. It's still a continuous process and constantly being refined. But when I first started, just to be completely vulnerable, like I was looking at my colleagues who were training me or who I heard talking on calls, and I was like, oh my gosh, like she sounds so great, or like this other person, I love the way they presented that. And I think it's really great to observe others and to think of how you want to use, the way that their methods, but you're not them, like you cannot. I feel like it's very difficult to be yourself if you're trying to be like others. And so in the way that I was communicating, I felt like I was trying to be a little more scripted into what my colleagues were doing, and it just wasn't working for me. So after a few months, I realized to myself that I was like, I'm me. Like I need to develop my own way of doing things. Every style is different, and I might like the way that she presents it, but if I feel like it's unnatural or it's too scripted, I need to figure out a way to communicate in a way that feels natural for me. And that's just, science is our currency. And this is, as MSLs, this is exactly what we bring to our KOLs. So the way that I communicate the science needs to work for, like to be more natural, conversational, and be in a way that I can tell the story.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah, we just want to touch upon how kind of this style that you've developed and kind of rings true as very personal to you. How does that affect kind of interactions with everyone that you're working with, whether it's just internally with people on your team, the KOLs, externally, like you mentioned, what kind of personal attributes have you kind of built into that interaction style?
Yeah, I think that it helps build trust, and it helps the relationship really develop, and helps you get to know your colleagues and other KOLs. I love learning about other people, and so I incorporate it. I love getting to know my KOLs on a personal level. So, I spend time at the beginning of my interactions and when I first meet a KOL to kind of ask them about their personal life, or like, things that they're interested in or they have going on, where they just traveled to, because I feel like that is something I can bring with me to the next meeting, or like, something that I can remember from them, and is more memorable. So, I mean, I just think that by doing that, you're kind of showing you care, beyond just you delivering the data, or the updates to the medical updates that you have to them, and you actually care about creating a long lasting relationship. I think that rings true for when I'm in a KOL meeting, or if I'm in a situation where I'm working with my internal colleagues or my fellow MSLs. Mm-hmm. So especially with my fellow MSLs, I think that, going beyond and showing that, you care more than just work, you develop a stronger relationship and a better way to work with each other. I love working with my team, and I love the team culture. Maybe some people are a little, I know which people, I know who on my team I can actually, maybe have more conversations with beyond work, and some that are more like, okay, I'm ready to, like, let's do the work and let's get out of here kind of, and it's just kind of like being adaptive. So I think MSL style is also very adaptive, like you have to adapt it to the person that you're talking to as well.
Yeah, that's good to know, kind of to build in more fluid conversations and help that style kind of help you in a variety of different ways that you're interacting with people. Yeah. And kind of going on the flip side, I wanted to ask you now about some of the challenging moments. So what are the main challenges you faced so far as an MSL, and how do certain aspects of your MSL style help you overcome the hurdles that have come with that?
Yeah, so there's always going to be challenges with when you're interacting with different personalities. There's always going to be, some challenges. I think one of them is, being aware that everyone is all the MSLs that you're working with are managing their own territory. We all have independent work, but there are times when we have to come together and we have to work on projects together. And so the timelines, being flexible with timelines, having time management, but also, being able to understand and other people's schedules, and, working with them in a way that you have to see it from their point of view, their perspective as well. So being flexible. I think another challenge that has come up is I don't have all the answers. And so being able to admit that, let me just double check. I don't have the answer on the top of my head. I also don't want to give you, incorrect information. Let me just double check. And then reaching out to, some of your colleagues. I personally feel comfortable reaching out to my manager, but I know that my manager is not always available. So I reach out to my colleagues as well. And sometimes they have the answer, especially those that have been on the team longer than I have. And they maybe have experienced something. So that's one of the ways I also build that relationship with my colleagues as well. Another challenge, let me think, that I have would be, so as an MSL, you're doing some things that some projects that you may get put on are not projects that you've ever had experiences with. I come from a smaller MSL team and a smaller biotech company. So we are involved in a lot of different projects. And for example, one, advisory boards. I didn't have a lot of experience with advisory boards when I first joined, but I was put in a position where I had to be part of, advisory board development, and I had to be part of content development. I have to be part of like the communication to the MSLs. And as a newer MSL, I was like, okay, this is like a challenge to me, because I'm talking to more experienced MSLs and I'm giving them direction, but I don't really even know the direction that I'm going in. But I think one of the positive things about working in a very close team too is that you can reach out to maybe maybe one or two MSLs that have had the experiences, and they like on the back end, and discuss that with them. And before you go out and send have them proofread an email, or have them double check your work, or just make sure you're on the right page before you're sending things out. So just asking for help when you need it, and not assuming that like you have to know everything off the bat. And I think the experience really helped me grow. Now I've been a part of an ad board development team, and I feel more confident in that. But you don't always have to be experienced in that to go and do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good to know, kind of learn on the job. And
MSL is a lot of learn on the job.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to be okay with that. And I didn't really quite think that that was the way it is, but
yeah.
truly.
Yes, so kind of in theme exactly with learning on the job, being a lifelong learner as someone who holds the MSL position. Were there other aspects that you learned to change and adapt to regarding your MSL style? So I know you gave that great story about what really didn't fit because you're trying to take pieces from other people's styles. But was there anything else that, like, now that you have a year and a half under your belt, that you really said, okay, this like needs some adjustment and now it's more refined?
Yeah, like everything. I don't think I'm at all like the most perfect MSL, but the reason why I love this role is because there's always improvement that can be done in areas of your MSL life. So one thing I wanted to improve upon was my presentation skills. I did do presentations in the past. The way you do presentations as an MSL is a little different. And I felt like my presentation skills were solid, but there's always parts that you can improve. So our team, luckily our leadership was able to do like a workshop for us, so that's always nice. But beyond that, if your team does not sponsor that for you, there's ways to go and seek ways to improve upon it. So another thing that I ended up doing was TED Talks is a book that I highly recommend. It's by Chris Anderson, and he speaks about all the amazing TED Talks. So, I was able to learn the different TED ways to present based off of TED Talks, and they give you examples of the TED Talks. You can go watch the TED Talks, like just seeking out ways to improve yourself. I think I do that quite often. I do LinkedIn Learning sometimes when I have like a few minutes. It pops up, it's like 5 minutes just to figure out how to, leadership style. Like, I think it's so important to understand that in this role, like you should want to, always get better. And if you feel like you're the best, I don't know if that's great either. If you feel like you are stagnant, like there's always ways to improve yourself. I'm sure there are like some MSLs that are so experienced that are truly the best. So I guess I can't say if you feel you're the best, it's bad. But as a newer MSL, like there are definitely things that you can do to always improve, and things are always changing in like the med affairs world, right? Like there's going to be so many evolutions, and even now that are happening in the role. So
I had a personal kind of question to follow that up. Are there instances that you can share how you formally asked for feedback and that helped your process of improving, or just ways of you're cultivating kind of input from different audiences to help that change that we're talking about?
So I've noticed that some people don't like to share feedback. So I kind of like to be direct. I'm like, I know that, I want to improve. So please tell me, kind of open that door. Please tell me, what I can improve upon. When we had that sponsored like seminar or workshop, we went around the room, everyone had to say something. So, maybe just saying like just one thing, like tell me one thing you think that I can improve on. Yeah, because many people I feel are not comfortable with giving feedback. I think constructive feedback is always good for you, So I just directly ask for it. In interviews, it's tough though, because as an aspiring MSL, like, one thing that I learned early on was, rejection is normal. I got rejected a few times. It wasn't something that I was happy, like familiar with all the time. And so there was a lot of emotions going through the interview process. And sometimes you're going to get negative feedback or rejection. But the thing is, some interviews, they won't tell you why they're rejecting you or give you the true reason. So you really have to like reflect and say, okay, like, what can I do better for the next one? I think that's why there's, an average of 4 to 5 interviews, because sometimes you don't actually, do your best in the first, second interview, but you learn from those interviews and eventually you figure out, what's going on in the interview process, and also like how you can improve, just going forward in general.
Okay, so a good mix of self-reflection but also in instances where they are willing, it's great to hear feedback directly from whoever you're interacting with at that moment, because it can only help in that instance. Yeah, and then kind of looking forward, you have a year and a half under your belt now. How do you hope to evolve or at least strive to improve upon your style in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I'm going to continue. I think there are a lot of books out there, a lot of podcasts that really help, MSLs advance in their careers and advance in their soft skills. So, I mean, I plan to continue to do that in the short term, like read more books. I have Atomic Habits in my bookshelf that I'm going to read next. And I think that, I listen to a podcast like once every week at least that has to do with MSLing. So having these tools and these different like, skill improvement avenues in your pocket and just do them consistently every week, I think is always a good thing. As the MSL role evolves, there's going to be, I think more like interest in, for example, like digital strategy and digital opinion leaders. Like, I think that my style will have to evolve with that. I have to learn a little bit more about the digital opinion leader world, or I have to figure out how AI kind of works. And I mean, personally, like AI used to scare me a lot. And I think that that's definitely something like I'm learning how to be more comfortable with, because I realize how much benefit it can actually provide in terms of like saving us as MSLs. Like, our time is very valuable, and we spend a lot of time, maybe that we don't have to when something's available for us to like get it for us quickly. You know what I'm saying? So trying to be more open-minded and adapting my style to more of a digital and tech, like tech involvement.
It's but equally exciting, but also kind of daunting sometimes to think about how fast things have been evolving in that tech world. And we have a follow-up question to that about what is your take been on engaging with KOLs in that digital health space, specifically through Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of valuable information that KOLs are sharing on the digital space. I think it's very difficult to, something that came to my mind was, I don't think that there's one single definition for like a digital opinion leader. And I think that that's something that needs to be weeded out a little better. But as far as, KOLs who are sharing, sharing data and science on Twitter, I think it's very valuable. You can see what they're interested in, what they're looking at. There are KOL mapping platforms that some companies have that actually help them gather, those tweets or whatever. I mean, I have a Twitter and I follow the certain people that I need to follow. I just use it for medical, but I mean, I think I saw a stat too that was like 70% of content on Twitter or TikTok or something is actually medical based. It has to do with medicine, or, like clinical. So I think that it's very valuable, definitely. And I'm not going to say I'm like really good at it, but I'm trying my best.
We're all learning. Yes.
Yeah, it's all about evolving and, like being open to it.
Yeah, that's good. No, we also have another question about any other specific podcasts that you're going to, in addition to Ask and Tell with MSLs, of just good learning tools in your pocket.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to give a shout out to Tom Caravella, and I'm sure a lot of people know about his podcast, MSL Talk, but it's amazing. I listen to it whenever there's a new episode, and he's just a great personality, and he truly is trying to advance and help the MSL field and aspiring MSL. So I listen to that regularly. There's some that I listen to that are more life associated. So On Purpose with Jay Shetty. I love that podcast. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Jay Shetty, but he's like a modern day monk.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some of the skills, the life skills and emotional intelligence skills I learned from him and some of the people he interviews. Let me think of, I have some specific therapeutic area, ones in HAV. I follow ones for like other therapeutic areas that we're investigating. So I think that that's always good to have in the background and to have saved. And then I maybe I should check my Spotify, but those are the only two that I listen to like religiously.
Yeah. Well, that's cool that you get, obviously keep up with the literature and keep reading, but also be listening in and know the latest clinical data in your therapeutic area too. That's a fun way to keep updated. So that's awesome. And yes, we have one final question. I want to really thank you again, first of all, for your time. Is there one thing or a short list of things that you wish you have known or done differently before you started on this journey of becoming an MSL?
Okay, so let me think. I think I can think of three. One thing I wish I would have done differently was I wish I would have gone into the MSL role sooner. I truly love being an MSL and I love working with my team. I love the team culture and I just, but I do value all of the clinical experiences that I gained. Everyone has their own journey but I think that everyone who is aspiring to be an MSL, your head's in the right place. I think MSL is going to be a very valuable tool for, companies in the future, and it will only grow. The second thing is I wish I would have been a little more patient with myself. I really wanted it so bad and I was doing everything I could, but I was kind of burning out in the process. So, just trying to be consistent, but don't be too hard on yourself. And especially if during the interview process, but also after when you get the role and you're onboarding, just know that it takes time to develop your MSL style. You can't really develop it fully until you're like in the field practicing it. So just be like patient with yourself. And then lastly, one thing is that similar to other careers where there's kind of like a busy season, like taxes and like accounting, they have busy seasons. I think there are certain MSL seasons, like busy seasons, like conference season, for example. So right now, personally, my like schedule is, I would say like maybe 40% travel and like 60% remote. And but that's normally, but if I'm looking at certain months, there's like there's like April's conference season, November is conference season. So it gets a little busier in those months where I have to travel a little more. So just keeping that in mind, I love to travel and I've kind of developed like a whole travel strategy where I just have everything packed away and I can just put it in a bag and I have my travel routine. So it's easy for me, but just something to think about. Like there are kind of like these busy seasons when it comes to being an MSL.
Well, thank you so much. Those 3 tips were wonderful to hear. And we hope a lot of aspiring MSLs kind of take that to heart and really have learned a lot from all of Anita's advice. So thank you again for your time. You've brought such a positive force to the webinar and dropping so many pieces of wisdom. We know it's going to make a huge impact to everyone who's listening. So with that, we'll conclude today, and I'll stop recording right now.